great events like this one. I want to thank all of our partners listed on our screen above. Please stand if you represent an organization or put your name, or you can put your name in the Zoom chat. Okay. Well, thank you for supporting us. I especially want to thank WDC members and our volunteers. We plan on doing more in person and online, keeping the health of our members in mind. We have many elected officials here tonight. I think I need to be closer to mine.
There we go.
All right.
If you are an elected official, please stand or put your name in the Zoom chat. We want to thank you for your service. And we have the state's attorney primary race has not been contested in 12 years. And many are not aware of the importance of this position in our county. They decide whether or not to charge someone with a crime. They decide types of plea bargains to offer and accept, and whether to offer alternatives to incarceration. Their opinions are also enormously influential to state lawmakers through the advocacy work of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association. The murder of George Floyd has brought about an extraordinary awakening to social injustice that is prevalent in our country. But we have additional work to do right here in our own county. The Office of State's Attorney must be committed to criminal justice reform in order for Montgomery County to be an even safer place to live, no matter a person's race or identity. We make progress with organizations like WDC, hold events like these, so that informed voters go to the polls. Please look out for WDC and our partners' opportunities to get out their votes. We have a comprehensive list of questions for the candidates today that were compiled by our club's Criminal Justice Reform Advocacy Subcommittee in consultation with our moderator. The recording will be available on the WDC YouTube channel after this event. We are thrilled to have all 4 candidates here. We have been showing you the biographies, so I will not be reading them, but I will introduce our candidates. So please stand as I introduce you. We welcome Tom Degonia. Bernice Mireku-North. And Carrie Paylor. And now I'm extremely excited to introduce our moderator for the evening, Professor Dr. Rashawn Rick. And Executive Director of the Lab for Applied Social Science Research at the University of Maryland, where my son attends. So happy to have a representative from the University of Maryland here. He is Go Terps. He's also a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and regularly testifies at the federal and state levels on racial equality and equity, policing and criminal justice reform, health policy, wealth, and family policy. He has published over 50 books, articles, and book chapters, and has appeared on numerous TV programs. I've seen him, and I'm sure you have too. So please welcome Dr. Ray.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We have so many things in common beyond your son being deterred with other connections as well. So that, I think that speaks to how the communities come together. So look, we have roughly 2 hours. I'm going to get started on this fairly quickly. We want to ensure that we maximize the time for the candidates to be able to speak. I'll go over some ground rules for you all that I think are quite important. So each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each answer. The timekeeper will give you all a 30-second mark, a 30-second signal, and candidates may finish the sentence after time is called. So you'll get 30 seconds, and then you'll get time, okay? I may ask a follow-up question, but we'll try to keep it moving because we got a series of questions. Because of the hybrid nature of this event, we won't be inviting audience questions, but we will have one lightning round of yes and no questions. There are 4 questions, each of you will start. We have collectively 12 questions. So the aim is to start alphabetically, start here, question 1, 2, 3, 4, so forth and so on. And we'll set it up that way. Hopefully we get through all of the questions so that everyone has the opportunity to start 3 times. There will be no opening statement, but you will have a 60-second closer. Okay, so that will be the final part of what we'll do, the 60-second closer. And just the final thing, hopefully we stay within time limits. Pay attention to the timekeeper. Don't make me cut you off. All right. All right, so let's get moving here. So I'm going to start with the first question. We will go to Mr. Degonia, and then we will just simply run down the line from there. First question, if elected, what are your top 2 priorities on day 1 and why?
Top two priorities on day 1 are making sure that I go out and I talk to everyone in our office, that I build the rapport and the leadership necessary to get my folks to actually make and implement the changes. Make sure that they're clear on our policies and our priorities. The second thing is to evaluate every case that we have in the pipeline right at that moment to make sure if there are cases that need to be dismissed, there are cases that need to be brought up. So it really is an assessment of the cases and working with the staff to make sure that they're on board with the changes that I want.
All right, thank you.
I'm getting the signs. Do we have to turn on?
You have to turn on. Yeah, each of the mics need to be turned on.
It's on. Just come a little
Closer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I got to do it again. Okay. There we go. How's that? That's
Nice.
Yeah, Mr. Degonia, we're going to have to restart. We're going to regurgitate exactly.
No way. No way. All those thousands of people out there on Facebook.
Go ahead.
So really the first top 2 priorities, meeting with the most recent hires all the way up to the most senior people in the office to make sure that they understand that I'm there, understand my priorities, and to bring them along and to get buy-in from them for policy changes. Second thing is to assess every case in the pipeline, cases that need to be dismissed, likewise cases that need to be brought up to speed and need to be prosecuted more earnestly than they have been. Those are my top 2 priorities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
School safety. I am deeply concerned about the safety of your children. I am deeply concerned about some of the trends that we are seeing about incidents that are occurring on our school property. I'm concerned about weapons that are being brought on school property. And I think we need to collaborate. I am collaborating with school officials on this issue, but again, we're just trying to identify issue 1, I think, is returning us to safer schools. Number 2, I have commissioned an organization called PPI. As a matter of fact, Dr. Brian Johnson, who is one of your colleagues at the University of Maryland, is the head of our study that is being done where we're doing an overall study about racial and equitable processes within my office from 9 different perspectives. And so we want to complete that program, go up with our dashboard so that we can increase transparency for the community to see exactly how we charge, who we charge, and how they fall into any demographic groups. And the timing of this is absolutely perfect because we have recently been added to the MDEX system, which is a peer system. We're about to change over to the case management system. And so we are hiring an organization, Carvel, to make sure that the information you want as a community is available to you. Thank you.
Ms. Mireku-North.
Yes, and thank you all again for coming out this evening. My 2 priorities, accountability and restorative justice for our youth. And when I speak about accountability, I'm talking about not just with the police, but also with prosecutors. This is the way we restore trust in the system, and the community have restored trust in the system. I constantly get calls, especially throughout this campaign, about little instances here and there of people questioning what the prosecutor's office is actually doing. It's a cry that needs to be addressed right away. So that's my immediate concern. And creating a pipeline for police accountability that can create creating a way to account for any police-related misconduct issues, as well as training the prosecutors on how to recognize the bias that we all unfortunately inherently deal with, and make sure that we're conscious of that when we decide what cases to go forward on, how we do our pleas, how we do our sentencing. Let's look at the full picture before we go into the work that the prosecutor office does. The second issue, restorative justice for our youth, particularly regarding mental health. I'm a big proponent of getting mental health care going and getting that all rolling as soon as possible, as well as dealing with permanent youth, juvenile diversion coordinator, not just at the pre-charge stage, but also pre-sentence stage. So those are my two priorities for our office.
Thank you, Mr. Paylor.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank the Women's Democratic Club for hosting this event tonight. It's really important. Thank you very much for hosting this event. First of all, I plan to use the transition time. So we're going to start with the election transition team. I'm going to meet with the principal. School safety is important, but I don't think we can wait till the day this morning. So we're going to start that transition team, and we're going to meet with the principal, particularly the high school principal. We're going to drill down a lot of the issues, particularly as it relates to ghost hunting and overall safety in the school. Upon my swearing in, there are a couple things we're going to start with. We're going to create or going to enhance matter conviction and sentencing integrity. And we will evaluate on application all the convictions, criminal convictions, and sentencing imposed upon application. Also, we're going to create a public integrity unit where we accept applications and review police misconduct, also misconduct of public officials. And also, more than two, we're going to contract with behavioral health specialists. Our administration is going to live at the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health. We're going to have behavioral health specialists on staff, contract on appointment to be able to advise attorneys on the status of those charged and also our victims. The model of law office is going to be see the whole person. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So now let's shift to talking about crime. A couple of you all alluded to this. We're going to start with Mr. McCarthy, and then we go down and end with my first candidate here, Mr. Degonia. Okay, so despite violent crime nowhere near early 1990 rates, violent crime is an increasing problem. How can the state's attorney's office use the office to reduce crime, particularly violent crime?
I think there's a number of ways we can do it. First of all, to put this in perspective, I've been state's attorney for 16 years. In the first 14 years I was state's attorney, crime was reduced in Montgomery County by 29.6%. That's what it dropped. The jail population, coincidentally, when I started as state's attorney, was at 906, and it fell under 600. We had a 36% drop in the jail population. At the same time, we were a safe neighborhood. Coming out of COVID, nationwide, Montgomery County experienced much of the same kind of crime increases that we've seen nationwide. Some of those increases, some of those numbers have abated, particularly in the area of carjackings as the kids have gone back to school. I do think violent crime, the legislation that was passed relative to ghost guns was a vital piece of legislation. I have started a gun task force within my office. The proliferation of handguns in the community, ghost guns in particular, is alarming. The numbers in every jurisdiction are going up by multiples every single year. We need to study with our police departments and different ways to communicate with the courts as well, the importance of taking care of these cases and giving them priority. We are doing that already.
Thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
Thank you for that question. In terms of how to reduce violent crime, it comes from a couple points. You have pockets of the community in this county that don't feel not just safe, but they don't feel heard. They're depleted in resources. They're desperate. So they're not understanding how to handle the tough times that we have just pulled ourselves out of in COVID. So when we're talking about solutions, we're talking about situations where we can deal with violence interrupted programs, and I definitely want to incorporate that, and just in Silver Spring pilot program, but also in Germantown. Where those are two, unfortunately, hot button areas of this county that has increased crime, not just generally with our youth. Just last night, there was a murder of a 21-year-old and 16-year-old. One was of African descent and Latino. There are certain parts of the community that don't feel heard, particularly by the justice system. And it's critical to have more people in the office that look like the people that are going through the tough times that they're going through right now in the county.
Mr. Paylor.
Thank you. Well, before we talk about what I'm going to do, we need to drill down to the root cause. What we have seen over the past 10 years, particularly in the south side of Montgomery County, is a lack of supervised activities for our young people. If you're from Montgomery County, you remember the Silver Spring Boys and Girls Club. You remember Wheaton Boys and Girls Club. So what we've seen is a lack of supervised activities. So that was part of the problem. COVID just exposed the problem. Now we have a group of young people who've gone 2 years without supervised activity. So I would use my office as state's attorney to advocate for more activities, to advocate the opening of Boys and Girls Clubs. Also, we will expand our diversion programs, but within our diversion programs, we will have real programming. I serve as deputy state's attorney for Prince George's County now, and along with our diversion programs, we have counselors, we have mentors who come in and address issues like housing insecurity, education, food insecurity, but we also provide solutions. I have a diversion program where we pay for community college. We also fund and pay for the public defender who represents the charged person in court until they are complete all the requirements. We would confer and coalesce with our unions and our employment services to get young people jobs. And I think we can do all these things once I'm elected state's attorney. Thank you.
Mr. Degonia. How do we reduce violent crime? We reduce violent crime together, and we do it through a community-based approach. I'm going to take 6 senior prosecutors. They're going to go out into the community, and they're going to do the same things that I've been doing all along. I'm talking to our faith-based organizations. I was over in Bethesda, Chevy Chase with Moms Demand Action the other day, talking about ways that we can have interrupters to actually get guns off the street. Talking to beat cops who are over here in downtown Silver Spring on their bikes about what needs to be done. But more importantly, meeting with our community members and listening to them as to what we need to do to interrupt. I'm glad to hear other candidates talking about community engagement. I'm glad to hear other candidates talking about gun task force. That was something that I've been talking about for the last 18 months. I rolled out the firearm safety task force 18 months ago, talking about how we're going to get guns off the street. We do it together. We do it with intelligence. We do it with partnerships, and we do it with aggressive enforcement. When someone steals a car and they flip it over right over here on Ellsworth Avenue, and they're there with an extended magazine ghost gun, and they go to jail for 45 days, that's not helping keep our community safe. That's not solving our problem. That is making us less safe. When I walk around with business owners in downtown Silver Spring and they're showing me bullet holes in the windows of plate glass windows in their businesses, that doesn't make us safe, doesn't make us a successful community. We have to do it together, and we have to get out of the courthouse and into the community, not where I'm telling you what to do, but where I'm listening to what your needs are so we can solve those problems together. That's how we reduce violent crime.
All right, so this next question is going to dovetail immediately off of that, and we're going to start with Ms. Mireku-North. We're going to talk about pretrial detention. Do you believe that current pretrial detention periods are too long? If so, how will you reduce the number of arrested people who are in pretrial detention while they await trial? And if you don't think pretrial detentions are too long, why are they currently appropriate?
A great question. Yes, I feel it's too long. One of the things about pretrial that I have always had an issue with is how we are assessing the accused needs pretrial. I think that's really what the critical issue is. So one can be on pretrial for 9 months, but the question is, what's happening in the meantime? Are bills getting paid? Is someone taking care of the child of the accused? Things like that. And I know we've done this in the county through studies, but there is a need to have a needs-based assessment as opposed to a risk-based assessment. when you're talking about pre-trial and whether someone is going to be a flight risk or a danger to the community, that's pretty standard. But what I'm proposing in our office is additionally having a needs-based assessment in terms of what issues are going on at the home, what's the area, what's the employment status of that particular person, because at the end of the day, this is about accountability. It's not about over-criminalization, it's about accountability for one's actions. And having that needs assessment as part of the pretrial process is critical. And that hopefully that would speed up the situation in terms of being on pretrial, because oftentimes people are not are waiting in pretrials due to either court continuances or something going on personally in that accused person's life, where they had to ask for a continuance to get an attorney, because I'm a criminal defense attorney. So I've been there where the person has asked for 2 postponements and then said, okay, now I want an attorney. Things happen. And having a needs-based assessment during a pretrial is a critical component to making sure that the process is done fairly. And we have a great pretrial program that I'm sure will be amenable to assisting in those changes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Paylor.
So quickly, the answer to your question is yes. The time of pretrial detention is too long. And one of the things that you can do is constantly evaluate. Like I said, the model in our office is going to be, when I'm state's attorney, to see the whole person. So as I mentioned before, we're going to have behavioral health specialists. We're going to constantly review the status of the persons who are detained. And it started with COVID. As deputy state's attorney now, particularly during the periods where court activities were suspended, we would review the jail list every morning. Every morning, we would review the jail list with the public defender's office to see where we could agree and when we could allow people to be released, released pre-trial. Sadly, our county jails are probably the largest provider of mental health services in the county, right? So we have to make sure that we are constantly evaluating and providing the services that we need for our citizens that find themselves detained. And when appropriate, we can reduce bond and allow for nonviolent offenders to be released on pretrial release and home detention. We would always advocate for that to be the option that we choose. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Degonia.
So yes, pretrial detention, is it too long? We have to find ways to assure the community safety, as well as understand the humanity of the individual who is there, who is presumed to be innocent at that point. So we have to balance public safety with that person and that usually that family's individual needs. Pretrial supervision, we have a robust pretrial supervision program in Montgomery County. We can utilize electronic monitoring, we can utilize home detention, as well as treatment that can be provided pre-trial to help that individual. What we have to do is, this is kind of a cash bail question as well, Maryland still has cash bail. If it's a policy that we don't ask for cash bail, this is a transparency issue. I'm going to make it a policy and I'm going to write it down and I'm going to put it out there so that people know that we're not going to ask for cash bail. You shouldn't be held pre-trial if you are poor and you can't post the amount of cash. It's still legal, but let's make it a policy. If it's a policy, let's write it down. It's transparent. We can be held to that. And I'm going to have my state's attorneys actually be prepared for those hearings. There are hundreds of cases a day that come up on bonds, and you have to be prepared for those bond hearings to assess those individuals, make sure that they can get back to work and support their families, but we have to do it in a safe and responsible way and look at all of our options.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
We don't, this is one of the frustrations in this campaign is that sometimes there's things that are said that are just not true in Montgomery County because we're so much far ahead of where others are in terms of dealing with issues in the criminal justice system. We don't use cash bond in Montgomery County. We haven't for a very long time. Tom mentioned that we have a very vibrant division of the Department of Correction that monitors people. We use risk assessment instruments that are based on social science research when making a determination whether or not someone can be safely released back into the community based on research. And those instruments are what are used in court every day. That's what we use. We don't ask for cash bond. We don't. That's a false narrative. I will tell you, one of the things that's great about this program that we have, and we do use electronic monitoring, and one of the things we do, the same way your dentist calls you up and says to you 2 days before you're supposed to get your teeth cleaned, by the way, John, tomorrow's your dentist appointment, don't forget. We call people that are out on bond. Guess what?
we only have a 2% FTA rate, which is the lowest by far. Average is about 20% around the state. In Montgomery County, it's 2%. People show up because we are so far ahead of the curve. We're not using cash bond. And if anything is delayed, the biggest delay to people being tried, I think in the system right now is for serious crimes, and it's delays because of COVID. And we've had 3 delays where the courts have shut down. That's the reality. It's not controlled by the state's attorney. It's really been controlled by the pandemic.
Okay, so look, Mr. Degonia and Mr. McCarthy, you all are leading right into my next question. We're going to start with Mr. Paylor. We're going to talk about cash bail. What is your position on cash bail? Do you think it is used appropriately in Montgomery County? If so, why? If not, why not? And then, of course, we get into the more elaboration is what policies or practices would you implement in the state's attorney's office to ensure that individuals are not detained on a pretrial basis based on their inability to post bond?
Well, first of all, I oppose cash bond. And as I mentioned earlier, I do serve as deputy state's attorney in Prince George's County, where Ms. Bradyboy's first weekend in office 3.5 years ago, we abolished cash bond. And it's not just about having a policy or writing it down. You need to have the executive experience in managing your direct reports and the line attorneys. So it wasn't just about saying, hey, we oppose cash bond. It was incumbent upon the leadership to actually appear in court, whether in person or on the Zoom meetings, and pay attention to the hearings. You have line attorneys that have been in the practice of asking for cash bond 5, 10, and 15 years. So it's going to take more than just a memo. You have to have the executive experience of managing an office. Mr. McCarthy has indicated that Montgomery County no longer is in the practice of requesting cash bond. But like I mentioned earlier, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning when I'm state's attorney, our leadership is going to be looking at the jail list every day. We do it now where I work. I'm going to bring that practice to Montgomery County, and we coordinate with private counsel in the public defender's office, and we file joint motions. When we see, hey, this person meets the requirement to be released pretrial, no longer poses a risk, or needs treatment that we can't actually provide in the county jail, then we work with the counsel and family to make sure they get the appropriate release to return home to their families. We don't want people in jail for too long and they can't get to court and ultimately could be found not guilty and sat in jail for 2 years for no reason. Thank you.
Mr. Degonia.
So as I alluded to before, I oppose cash bail. You shouldn't be held because you can't afford to post the bail. It has to be written down. You can't make up a policy and say, well, this is our policy. Write the policy down. That is transparency. Put the numbers out there. Who is held pretrial? Why are they held pretrial? So that not only the defense bar, the bench, but the public can know exactly why you're holding someone and what the justification for holding them is. So it is important that you write it down, not just for public transparency, but for internal accountability. When I come in and I meet with my staff and I start talking about my priorities, I don't want there to be any unclarity about where we're headed. And I want it to be crystal clear. And the best way to do it is you put it in black and white, and you can report out to the community, and you can hold your staff accountable that and trust that they are going to implement the policy changes that I'm going to bring about. So it is important to have it written down, and I do oppose cash bail.
Mr. McCarthy.
I almost feel like I'm going to repeat the same thing I just said. We don't use cash bond. We have the same person that does bonds every day. It's not. I have a good number of 75 or 80 lawyers that work for me, but they're the same people do bonds every day. They know what the policies are. Anybody who's ever gone to a bond hearing in Montgomery County, just go to the bond hearing. Conversation is usually between the person who works for the Department of Corrections, who's worked out the social science instrument, who's done the risk assessment instrument based on the research, having a conversation with the judge. I will tell you, I joined with my friend, Brian Frosch, who was a great proponent of ending cash bond in Montgomery County. He spoke out, not in Montgomery County, but in the state. But we were ahead of the state. In many of these instances, when these things are brought up, you're creating an issue for Montgomery County that we don't have. We've passed this many, many years ago. We've been using the same social science research to make our determination, and the only time people are detained is if they would pose a risk to public safety? How do you think we reduce the average jail population during the time I've been state's attorney from an average of 906 a day to about 600? We intelligently were making decisions that the only people that were detained were the people that posed a danger to you, and the others would be sent home and monitored in the community to return, and they do.
Thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
So I'm going to speak from personal experience as a criminal defense attorney in Montgomery County and across the state of Maryland. I had a client that did not get cash bail. He got no bond. He could not afford it, bail either way, but because of his priors, that was a decision that was made. So there is, of course, some truth to the lack of cash bail not being used in Montgomery County. But what's happening, and it's happening all across the state of Maryland, when there's not the issue, not the cash bond tool on the table, there's no bond. So that's going to require us working with the judges to understand that we cannot criminalize poverty. I will have no tolerance for that. And I'll make sure my line prosecutors understand that, as well as the chiefs of the divisions in the office. We have to have situations in the bail reviews where we understand the socioeconomic conditions of the accused. So we don't just basically rubber stamp whatever pretrial says. We have to have that partnership with pretrial and with the public defender's office, frankly, who is the first to get the information on the defendant even after pretrial and bail review hearings. So the bigger issue is we cannot criminalize poverty, and we cannot tolerate that in Montgomery County, the most affluent county in the state of Maryland, where we have a big gap between the have and have-nots. And that's something that I'm going to implement not only as the state's attorney, but really how I am in my practice of law. Because I literally have gone through this in Montgomery County. And to speak on the conditions that one is going to be locked opposed to as a risk to public safety, as from my own experience, it's also the fact that people might have priors and they are less inclined not to show up for court. That's another element to be considered. That's still no excuse for criminalizing poverty.
Hey, so let's do this. We have just a little bit of time. Let's do one more round with this. We'll do the same order, because I think this is such an important issue. And I think what people probably heard was a little bit of confusion, even though we heard hopefully some clarity. It seemed to be, okay, this is a practice, maybe not written down in policy. And then we talked about people's individual experiences. So let's do another round and have people to be able to respond to what some of your colleagues have said up here. Mr. Paylor, we'll start with you, and let's do 1 minute. And let's see if we can do that.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, see if we can do that.
As I stated before, as deputy, I'm part of a management. No. As deputy state's attorney, I'm part of a management team that manages approximately 170 full-time equivalents and a budget of approximately $20 million. And so a lot of people can talk about what they would do, what they might do. I'm the only challenger in this race that has the actual managerial and executive experience. So when we're talking about how we deal with pretrial detention, like I just mentioned, yes, you do write it down, and yes, you do issue memorandum. But along with that, you have to have the managerial experience to make real change in the office. And like I just mentioned earlier, we would make that known to all of our unit chiefs, and they'll be responsible for communicating that to the line attorneys. But at the very same time, you have to be embedded. You have to be part of the process. You just can't give a mandate and stay locked up in your office, right? So part of the line attorneys want to get feedback, and they want to know that, that I agree with how they're handling the matter. So what I would do is attend the hearings, whether virtual or in person, and make sure that they have a clear understanding of what the expectations are of the office. So it's more than just a memorandum. You have to be actively engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Degonia.
You have to have a clear policy, but I'll tell you, I was in district court 2 days ago on a bond hearing. I was in circuit court a week ago on a bond hearing for cases that I'm actively involved in, whether I'm representing a victim who has a voice to be heard in the consideration, or whether I'm representing a defendant who has a voice to be heard. And they are complicated things. You have to understand the person. Who do you serve? This is a domestic violence assault. Is this person a risk to reoffend? Does he pose a threat to the victim in this case? However, you have to balance the threat to the victim. How do we adequately assure he is going to be supervised with GPS monitoring, with location notifications, that he can actually go out and do the work that he needs to do
to be able to support that family. They're complicated issues. It's not a one size fits all. And I'm the only person who's in that courthouse on a daily basis, handling cases both in district court, at district court bonds, and talking and appearing in front of the judges, and have the relationship to get the judges on board to craft appropriate bonds to make sure we remain safe and people can work.
Mr. McCarthy. Again, we don't use cash bond. And so, you know, it's funny, I think we all kind of agree that we should use cash bond. I think there's a common agreement among us here. And I believe that everybody that works for me knows that, and we don't use it. You know, one of the things that we've done, part of this is repeating a conversation about something that is not an issue in Montgomery County. It's not. This is part of the challenge of this particular campaign when issues come up about, well, we need more diversion. Well, go out to the table that's in the lobby of this building. Look at the diversionary and educational programs that exist here in Montgomery County to make sure people don't ever become part of the criminal justice system. No one is close to what we're doing, preventing them from becoming engaged in crime, or if they get arrested for a crime, we find creative ways to make sure that there are alternative ways in which we can deal with that short of incarceration. All right, thank you. Please visit the table outside. Ms. Mireku-North.
Thank you for the extra minute, because I realized I forgot my second point. The second part of the question was, how do we prevent these circumstances where cash bail is even an option? And it goes to my earlier point about having a needs-based assessment. What I referenced earlier was to, and I'm going to explain now, is that having an understanding of the full person, especially the economic conditions, will prompt me as the prosecutor and to talk to the chiefs of our divisions or the individuals that are doing the bail reviews, say, hey, look, why are we constantly recommending these types of bails for someone who is stealing cigarettes or toys, whatever, on a constant basis? Let's look at the whole person before we consider these types of bail proposals to the judge. That's the kind of conversations we need to be having to even remove the possibility of cash bail. Look, as a prosecutor, it's a great privilege to serve as a state's attorney, a great privilege. And what I found as a former prosecutor myself is that judges really rely on what the prosecutor says a lot. And as a criminal defense attorney, I'm constantly having to stand up for my client and fight the system, so to speak. But I have no experience both sides. So having a prosecutor that understands both sides of the system creates fair opportunities, so we're not having cash bail be a constant threat to having people being criminalized by their poverty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're starting back with Mr. Degonia here. And this is a long question. So just letting you all know, I'm starting to get into my academic rant here. So these will be longer questions. We'll have a lightning round after this question, and we'll quickly go back to the dissertation length questions. So across the nation, state's attorneys get 95% of their convictions via plea bargains, negotiated out of the public's eye. In 2019, the Justice Policy Institute, which is located in Washington, D.C., published a 50-state study finding that Maryland's prisons are more racially disproportionate than any other state, even Alabama. That says a lot. I'm originally from Tennessee. Considering that Maryland SB 763 passed this year to require a study to add more transparency to the plea bargaining process, what would be your process for conducting data analysis to ensure Montgomery County does better and is at the forefront of this issue?
It's absolutely a critical issue, and it's something that people have been crying out for a long time. More data to understand, more data to make better decisions. Maryland, statewide, has something called MAGS. It's the Maryland Automated Guidelines System, and it's been online for a number of years. All the critical data information is captured in that form and has been captured in that form for a number of years. It is important when we set policies that we have policies that eliminate disproportionate charging, that is overcharging. Don't charge someone with the maximum that you think you could get. It's not truth in sentencing, it's truth in charging. So charge the crime that was committed. That's the first step. Go back and look at the MAGS information to see what were they charged with, what did they plead to. Eliminate, and I don't know if we're gonna have a question on this, the mandatory sentences. Mandatory sentences in plea bargaining generate disproportionate results. That is, I'll take a plea instead of risking going to trial and maybe being found guilty of a mandatory sentence. So don't use mandatory sentences as a plea bargaining tool. That'll help eliminate disproportionate pleas and will help understand what we're actually going to do to keep our community safer, not just lock people up for longer periods of time.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I think data is really, really important, and I think transparency is very important. We are in the midst of, and have been for about a year now, working with the University of Maryland, the University of Florida, Loyola University, and other organizations to study precisely the kind of information that people in the community want. And we have pledged to publish a study. We're putting it up on a data dashboard so people are going to be able to see it in real time. You know, can I say, if you go outside, there is an editorial. When I started and hired PPI to do the study in Maryland, I was the first prosecutor in the state. There's an editorial that was published in the Baltimore Sun praising us for the bravery of doing that and allowing this information to be published as someone who runs for office. Read the editorial from the Baltimore Sun. Read the editorial from the Washington Post. Independent voices who have looked at what we're doing in Montgomery County. This is a wonderful conversation. I agree we need to do it. The issue is we've already started it. We are in the process of doing it. I've been to nationwide seminars with the leading experts in this entire area about what they're doing in Chicago, what they're doing in Miami, what they're doing in New Orleans, what they're doing in San Francisco. I've met with all of these people to steal the best ideas and bring them back here to Montgomery County. But the study is already underway. Read the independent voices of the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post telling you that we are the first. We've started this.
Thank you, Ms. Mireku-North.
Yes, so this is a situation where it's critical to be a problem solver, and creating an opportunity to increase transparency in data is going to solve the problem of distrust in the system. And so that's why I've been preaching this for the last several months during this campaign, but having someone at the screening stage of the prosecutor's office before there's even an opportunity for a line prosecutor to get hold of the case. We're looking at the charges to be filed. Let's look at the any racial bias that we have seen in the office in terms of what types of charges are being filed for particular individuals. So having a racial justice analyst, as well as a data analyst, so we can continue to determine what type of pleas are being offered to which individuals. So I propose having those people at the real critical stages of prosecutors' work, because when we're talking about charges to be filed, that is in the power of the prosecutor. And if we don't have a equity-minded person making those decisions on the charging documents, then we're going to perpetuate the problem of distrust in the county about our criminal justice system. Now, with respect to the history of transparency in the office, when I was a co-chair of the Reimagined Public Safety Task Force, we were crying as community citizens for more data, more transparency. We didn't have it. You know, that's one of the things that I lament about in our work, and we didn't have information to really be a community-centered solution in restoring trust. And that is why, as again, a prosecutor's office has a lot of power, a lot of authority, and a lot of access to information that can easily be readily available. And it wasn't when we were on task force members. And that's what I want to implement more of as the next state's attorney.
Mr. Paylor.
Well, thank you for that question. And this really gives me an opportunity to distinguish myself from the other challenges. Handling cases in court does not give you the executive or the managerial experience. This question comes down to budget. You have to have the experience dealing with the executive and the council to get your budget passed that includes a data specialist. You need to have a data specialist. Right now, I confer regularly with county councils, county executive. I've actually been appointed by the Montgomery County Council twice to do 2 different commissions. So I have the relationship and the credibility to go to the county council and say, I need to expand my budget to include a data specialist. Right now, in my current capacity, I work regularly with the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention in Youth and Family Services, where we get grant funding. I would either get it through the general fund or I'd get grant funding, a data specialist to analyze the data, as it relates to the MAGs that Mr. Degonia mentioned, and also the issues of racial equity as it relates to the sentences. As I stated earlier, I will create a conviction and sentencing integrity unit to evaluate all of our pleas and convictions to make sure that we are getting the appropriate sentences, and these sentences are done within the guidelines. But this is the question purely, it takes executive and management experience to be able to go to the county executive and go to the council and say, the citizens have called for transparency. And now we need to fund that with general funds and grant funds to make sure we can provide the information that our citizens are requiring of our elected officials. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all. So some of you went in depth about what type of data. So as a sociologist, I think about what type of data. I think when the public hears data, sometimes it just goes into a black box. They don't exactly know what type of data you're talking about, how you're going to examine it, and then also what you're going to do with it. So I want to give each of you, and I know that's a loaded question, but a minute, we'll start here and work our way down like we did with that question, to talk specifically about what type of data you will be collecting and then what you will do with that data once it is collected and analyzed.
So transparency is not an election year option. Transparency is something we have to have all the time, and we haven't had it. It's great that we've got a study. It's great that it's going to be done a year after the election's over. The data that I would collect are the core demographics, the racial background of the person, the age of the person, the length of the sentence, and study those sentences to see if they disproportionately, because we do. I don't need a study to tell me that. I'm in the jail, I'm in the juvenile detention center, and I can tell you there's a disproportionate impact. The question is, what do we do with that data? What do we do with that demographic information? Are we making consistent plea offers that are consistent across the board, regardless of race, age, gender, or identification? That's what we have to use that data for, to make sure that we have equitable sentences across the board. I don't need a study to tell me that. I'm in the jail. I'm telling you, there's a disproportionate impact.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, I think we want to study this at every stage in which there's an interaction between the defendant and the court and the state attorney's office. It might start with bond, it might start with charging. By the way, the vast majority of charging does not originate in the state attorney's office. 17,000 cases originate every year in this county. It starts with the police. We come in after the charge is there. So there's a false assumption here that people that we're at the front line. In some systems, charges are never laid unless a prosecutor sees it. That's not the Maryland system. The charges are late. 17,000 people are charged. We come in and evaluate it after that. Certainly, we pre-evaluate some of the felonies and some of the juvenile matters. But if you're going to look at a study, race, ethnicity, age, I do think some of the same factors we look at in terms of sentencing guidelines. Whether there's a weapon involved, was there a handgun? Was there a especially vulnerable victim that was a child or a senior citizen? Was there victim injury or death? And what was the record of the individual involved? I think if you're trying to look at a study, you do want to know race, ethnicity, but you want to know the totality, the same things that are mandated by the Maryland guidelines.
Thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
The first set of data would be the characteristics of the accused, and that's going to require working with the police department on that because they are on the front lines when the emergency is brought about. They're the ones that collect the information. And frankly, they're the ones that want to make sure that their work is not in vain. So they'll do what a prosecutor is asking of them in terms of collecting the right information. When I was a state's attorney in Anne Arundel County, we had a particular form for domestic violence cases. It's very unique to any other county that I've worked in since then, where we asked the police to draw where the injuries were occurring. That's a very unique thing. And that came from a partnership with the police department and the state's attorney's office. That's the kind of data literally that can be done with that type of partnership. Second, having a data collection of diversion options. What happens is that sometimes people are randomly told about the issue of drug court or mental health or things like that. There's no set criteria that's available to public openly to all communities as to how to get access to diversion programs where they're not automatically worried at the juncture of being charged. Oh, am I going to go to jail? Am I going to be deported and things like that. There are options that should be laid out, and we need to have data to collect, determine how people are finding out about these options to be diverted out of the system.
All right, thank you. Mr. Paylor.
Thank you. Well, I've heard about studies. Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Degonia mentioned studies. Sadly, studies don't get people out of jail. Okay, like I mentioned before, I would create a conviction and sentencing integrity unit. And on application, these applications would be reviewed. And I want to tell you a personal example. There was a police officer that was convicted of manslaughter. The officer's guidelines were 20 years. The judge sentenced this officer to 45 years, over 100% over the guidelines. The officer was in jail for 13 years, solitary confinement, because that's what happens when law enforcement is incarcerated. He applied to our office. We worked with the University of Maryland, and we worked with his defense counsel to make sure that that sentence was reduced to the guidelines. So once we had, with a joint motion, sentence was reduced to 20 years, he had served 13, and based on good time, that officer's home with his wife and his family, his grandkids today. So you have to have real solutions. Going to the jail, handling cases does not solve the problem. And you can take the data. What do you do with the data? You give that data to your conviction and sentencing unit, and they apply that data when they're reviewing the applications. And then when it's appropriate, you work with defense counsel, you work with public defenders, and you get these people home. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. So at this point, we are halfway through the debate. You all are right on time. Like, we are literally spot on. I love when that happens. That rarely ever happens. And so just a couple of housekeeping things. The first big thing is masking is in effect in this space. So if you came in late, please put on a mask and keep your mask on. Besides, I guess, those of us up here talking at this point. This second part of the debate is a lightning round. These are going to be yes, no questions. Yes or no. That is all you get to say. Okay.
A little cross-examination.
It's all you get to say, yes or no. Yeah, you all know the drill. Don't act out of order. Don't make me play judge up here. Yes or no questions. And we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Mr. Paylor, be the first question, so forth and so on. You all get the point. There are 4 of these questions. Lightning round. First question. Montgomery County has drug court. I don't know what happened up here. Yeah. I think I'll just put it down. Okay. All right. So Montgomery County has drug court and mental health court. Some jurisdictions have domestic violence court. Would you support investigating whether Montgomery County should have a domestic violence court? Yes or no?
Yes. Can I add to that?
No, not right now. Just yes, literally yes or no lightning round questions. Ms. Mireku-North, yes or no?
Yes.
Question doesn't make sense.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yes.
Mr. Degonia.
Yes.
No question.
Yes.
Great. Okay, next question. We'll start with Ms. Mireku-North. Should the county follow the lead of other jurisdictions, including Washington, D.C., Fairfax County, Baltimore City, and Prince George's County, by providing counsel for detained immigrants in all circumstances?
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy.
Not crimes of violence.
So no.
No.
Mr. Degonia.
Yes.
Mr. Paylor.
Yes.
All right, next question. And we kind of already talked about this in a sense, but we'll be specific about it because there are a couple of very specific parts of the question that go along with data. So Mr. McCarthy, start with you. Will you publish detailed racial, ethnic, and gender statistics pertaining to your prosecutions, plea bargains, diversions, and so forth on the state's attorney's website every year?
Yes.
Mr. Degonia.
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Paylor.
Yes.
Ms. Mireku-North.
Yes.
Okay. Last question, Mr. Degonia, we'll start with you. Should juveniles be prosecuted as adults?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
No. Mr. Paylor.
No.
Ms. Mireku-North.
No.
Mr. McCarthy.
It's not a yes or no question. It's not a yes or no question.
So if you had, I mean, so I guess that means no, right? Or you think that means
it's not a yes or no question.
So should juveniles be prosecuted as adults? If you don't think no, then it means you think yes in some circumstances.
I think there's a myriad number of factors. It's not a fair yes or no question.
Right. So I think people will probably take that as a yes, and then we can do some follow-up after we get done. Is that fair? Okay. So now let's do that. So you all got asked these questions. These were yes or no questions. Some of them seem easy for all four of you. You agreed. Some of you disagreed. Let's go back to the juveniles. Mr. McCarthy, feel free to take a minute and unpack this beyond the yes or no response.
Look, I think that their age is beyond which currently right now, where a child begins when they're charged with a crime is not dictated by the state's attorney. It's dictated by state law. We follow the law. Therefore, quite candidly, under current law, 14 or 15-year-old kids charged with crimes that carry a life sentence shall be charged as an adult. I don't agree with that. I do think that there are substantial modifications that need to be made to legislation. However, I will tell you, just as an example, Lee Boyd Malvo, the DC sniper, was involved in 22 attempted murders and murders. He killed 7 people that lived in this community. I will tell you, when you kill 7 human beings and involved in 22 attempted murders and murders, and you're 17 years old when you're arrested, and the juvenile system is broken in Maryland, which is something we're not talking about, putting someone into a system that is broken does not protect the community.
Okay, thank you. Does any other candidates want to respond to that? Ms. Mireku-North, go ahead. We'll give everyone a minute. We'll just go down the line and we'll end with you. Okay.
Sure. So it was yes or no question. No, juveniles should not be prosecuted as adults. But the law is the law in certain circumstances, and accountability is critical. That doesn't mean that as a prosecutor, you can't fight for justice to make sure we're treating our children fairly. It's absolutely inappropriate in this stage, 2022, to have a law and order mindset and not think about justice as on the forefront. So that is my explanation as to why I said no. But yes, the law is law. I mean, all 4 of us are sworn attorneys. We've learned the bar. We're all practicing criminal defense or criminal of some sort. So we understand the law. But the question is, are we going to move forward and work with our state legislators to be more fair to our children, especially given the last 2 years? Yes, a number of our young people are not only killing each other, but getting killed, especially the incidents last night. That doesn't mean we can't work towards a more fair system, treating our youth as youth, and I'm committed to doing that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Paylor.
Yeah, so in my tagline on my website, I say criminal justice is evolving, and it is not evolving at the appropriate pace here in Montgomery County, and specifically as it relates to issues regarding juvenile justice. Mr. McCarthy is correct that by law determines where a young person is charged based on the crime that is committed. And there are some ages as low as 13, 14, you can be charged with homicide as an adult. What he fails to mention is the position regarding the waiver hearings. The prosecutor has the discretion to contest when a person is waived back to juvenile court, or they can consent to the juvenile waiver. Okay, and so there's 4 letters that I use to frame this argument: A, B, C, D. Adolescent brain cognitive disorder. We know now, the science, we know better now than when the laws were created, that a young person doesn't fully have brain function, adult brain thinking, until about the age of 26. But yet we are still prosecuting them based on an antiquated mindset. Criminal justice, there's a renaissance of thought. Criminal justice has evolved. It's not evolving at the appropriate pace. And I am the candidate to bring Montgomery County into modern times, particularly as it relates to juvenile justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Degonia.
It's absolutely why this office is so critical. Prosecutors exercise discretion and they push and change. You make a decision as a prosecutor where you can charge. There are laws on the books. I've supported the law to support original jurisdiction for juveniles to be charged as juveniles, not as adults. There was a package of legislation. I spoke on behalf of it, supported it. It didn't pass. That is something that you have to push, and that's the policy. you push the policy on the legislation, and you also actually do it in practice. When I was representing a young man who is charged as an adult for a fight with his stepfather and he's held in an adult jail, I can tell you no one benefits from that. And I have to fight the waiver hearing to get him down and back into juvenile court because he was overcharged. So when you talk about change, change can't wait. And you can't wait, and those kids can't wait when they're sitting in jail. And the person who needs to get out and go to work can't wait. And the victim who needs to know if that guy's gonna get released or not, cannot wait. And that's why this office is so critical, and you have the discretion in making those policy changes for juvenile justice.
All right, thank you. So let's continue this conversation. I really like how the questions build, and then you all lead me to my next question. I appreciate that.
Whatever we can do.
Yeah, I set up the questions. You all fall in line. I love it. So Mr. McCarthy, we're going to go to you and continue the line, and we're going to continue this conversation about juveniles. So loaded question here. Montgomery County's Division of Juvenile Services reported in 2019 that Black youth are 4 times as likely to be referred to juvenile services as white youth. According to the Office of Legislative Oversight, 88% of young people who enter the criminal justice system in Montgomery County are children of color, and 99% of children charged as adults in the county are children of color. How do you explain those statistics? What can the state's attorney do to reduce the disproportionate percentage of Black youth in the criminal justice system? And I think in Montgomery County, we could also think about immigrant youth as well. We asked one of the yes or no questions about that, and there was some disagreement there. So final part of this question, how will you work to ensure that you and your staff are not contributing to these racial disparities?
First of all, again, how does the system work when it comes to juveniles? The juvenile system, unlike the adult system, is not run by Montgomery County. The juvenile system is run by the State Department of Juvenile Services. It is a state-run department. When a child comes into the system, and by the way, we divert many of the kids before they even get to the DJS, but the decision as to whether or not a case is forwarded to my office is made by the Department of Juvenile Services. It's not made by us. As a matter of fact, if you look at the numbers in terms of children that come into the juvenile justice system, about 55% of the kids are held at intake. That means we never see them. Maybe 45% of children come. And how many cases does that amount to? Someone asked me during the course of this campaign, do you spend 50% of your budget on juvenile prosecutions or juvenile justice? The answer is no, it's a relatively small percentage because we have 17,000 in the district court as an example. And last year we papered 500 cases involving juveniles. So we have made decisions regarding juveniles, but it's an increasingly small number. In terms of the overall workload of the state's attorney's office, it's a very small number of cases. Quite candidly, if I was going to characterize the children that have their cases papered in Montgomery County today, it's a violent crime, maybe a murder, maybe a rape, maybe a carjacking, or they have been in and out of the system so many multiple times before we had no choice but to paper the case. What we paper a very 500 versus 17,000 in district court. It's a very small number. We have 170,000 kids in our school system.
Mr. McCarthy, thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
The youth in our juvenile justice system are being educated in what I argue the most incredible public school system in the state of Maryland. There's no reason why Muslims should be Black and brown in our county. No reason. That is why I have proposed having a juvenile diversion coordinator. Yes, when DJS makes the decision to send the case up to the state attorney's office, that decision is the decision of DJS, but they're not the ones before the magistrate judge, next to the public defender, saying state of Maryland versus whatever the kid is, or I'm sorry, in whatever the kid is. That's the prosecutor. And so before it even gets to that point, I want to bring in a juvenile diversion coordinator so we can see what community options are available for the youth. Look at the whole person of the juvenile, what's going on with the family, what's going on with school, before we even consider putting that person through the system and further traumatize them. Because that's what's really it's all about. When these kids are going through the system, they're going through something, a result of trauma. And it's about time we stop disregarding that. that's inappropriate for this county and the way to move forward for the future of Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. Paylor.
Yeah, once again, thank you for that question. I'm not going to repeat the statistics regarding Black youth charged and adults in Montgomery County, but I can tell you it's horrific. And it's personal to me because I was raised in Montgomery County. I have the lived experience as an African-American male in Montgomery County. So the question was, what are you going to do about it? Well, let me tell you what I do on my job. We started a pilot program in Prince George's County where we have a pre-waiver conference with DJS. So we meet with DJS, we evaluate the programs prior to the waiver hearing. And so that's why it's so easy for us to go to court and join in and consent to respondents, to adult defendants being waived back to juvenile court. It's an active practice. We started it, it's been adopted statewide. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna bring that practice to Montgomery County. So before a respondent, a young person goes to court, we will meet with DJS, we will meet with their lawyer and say, here are the programs. Here are the applicable programs. There's new case law that came out in 2021. The Davis case says that the ability to benefit from treatment is the standard. If a young person can benefit from treatment, they shall be waived back to court. So we know what the programs are. We know what the outcome is before we walk into the courtroom. And it takes that kind of passion to make change in Montgomery County. And I'm the person that's going to make that change here in Montgomery County once I'm elected state's attorney. Thank you.
Mr. Degonia.
So the question is, how do you change those numbers? And we change those numbers through a community-based prosecution approach. We do three things. We better engage with our high schools and our middle schools. We identify the kids and we get the resources to them there so that schools are places to learn, not to be punished. We're not going to be a backstop for school discipline in the state's attorney's office. We work with our police and we set the priorities with them so that they understand on the front end, upstream, they're not charging juveniles or they're charging juveniles with more appropriate offenses so that we're getting fewer kids into the system to begin with. And then everybody at this table is going to tell you that DJS is broken. The state agency is broken. Not one person up here has said, I'm going to take the lead in Montgomery County and I'm going to find the resources, because if the state's not going to deliver the resources to help our kids, I'm going to the county council. I'm going to our faith-based organizations. I'm going to our new superintendent and I'm talking to her and I'm saying, listen, these are the resources we need to keep the kids out of the system. I've done it before with the Family Justice Center Foundation. We build those partnerships, we find answers, and we make it work because we're fortunate to live in Montgomery County where we have those resources. I'm not going to sit back and rely on DJS to solve problems for kids when I'm in a position of leadership where I can actually leverage those partnerships to get the resources to those kids that they need to keep them out of the system.
Okay, so this next question builds on this. I'm going to start with Ms. Mireku-North and end with Mr. McCarthy. Does Montgomery County have sufficient diversion programs? And if not, what improvements would you make as state's attorney?
No, that's the quick answer. Because if we had the appropriate diversion programs, we wouldn't have the uptick in violent crime, particularly with our youth. And that's why I'm proposing, not only, I mentioned earlier with the juvenile youth diversion coordinator, but also developing a juvenile mental health court. Currently, it's only one at the adult stage. And really, when you have a county that has children crying out for mental health support in their school system, it is beyond my understanding why the State Attorney's Office can't take initiative to see what can be done within the power of a prosecutor. And juvenile mental health court can catch those that frankly might not have been able to get attention at the diversion stage. We're trying to keep them out for various reasons, but we're not going to give up on them. You can still hold the youth accountable for their actions, but the key is to restore them and to address the trauma. And a mental health court can do that. It can be as long as the adult mental health court of 18 months, where we're working not only with the youth, but with the families to get the services they need. And frankly, working with expanding the purpose of the Family Justice Center is another option as well. It's a fantastic program for domestic violence. Why can't we cater to the families that are in need as well and determine what sort of resources that they need that the Family Justice Center can also provide? So those are the things I'm going to explore to make sure that we are truly expanding our definition of diversion. It's not just, and what I will also say, it's not just diverting people out of jail, but diverting people out of the system. You can still hold people accountable without over-criminalizing if they don't need to be, once we get to the root cause and figure out who the real person is behind the act.
Mr. Paylor, I'm going to add on to this question for something that Ms. Mireku-North brought up, and that's about access. So not only do we think about, does the county have sufficient diversion programs, and if not, then how do we think about access to those particular programs that are existing and also building to create new ones?
Well, my answer to that in terms of the number, I don't necessarily think it's important of the number of diversion programs. It's what do the programs offer? So I want to talk about programs that I manage that I'm going to bring here. There's one program I managed called Back on Track, and it was started by Kamala Harris when she was district attorney for San Francisco. And this is a program where upon conviction, you get the conviction on your record for nonviolent felonies. You perform 280 hours of community service, but then guess what? We pay for, through the program, we pay for GED, or certificate, and an associate's degree with the community college. Also, we pay for the public defender and a case manager that monitors offenders through the program. And upon completion of the community service, the education component, and the mentoring program, we have a hearing before the judge where the conviction is stricken, a PBJ is entered, and your record is immediately expunged. And so you can go on, and we also coordinate with employment agencies to get people employed. So it's not the number of diversion programs, it's what services are provided. So it's not enough just boot someone out of the system. You have to meet them where they are, address the needs. And think about it, if we would have had a program like this, I guarantee you we wouldn't have seen a spike. It would have blunted the spike in crime. We've had 2 to 3 years with no supervised activities for our young people and no services upon receiving some of the diversion programs that Mr. McCarthy offers. So you need to be more than just diverted and let go. You need to have opportunities to improve the quality of your life and your prospects here in this great county of Montgomery County. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Degonia.
It's not just about the number of programs, it's about the quality of programs. Montgomery County's got lots of programs, let me tell you. We've got programs that have been around for 20, 25 years, and they've been operating in exactly the same way, but are they effective programs? Are those programs working? Our intervention program for substance abusers, is that working? Our alternative community service program, is that working? Let me tell you what does work. The Family Justice Center works. I spent 12 years at the Family Justice Center, and we've adopted and adapted every year. We partner. We don't have to go out and recreate the wheel. If somebody's providing a service, if they have the counseling available, we partner with them. We bring them in. We're the hub, and you're the leader of that change. And so it's not just about making a number of programs. I would certainly expand our mental health court, both to juvenile. I'd have a one-stop shop for our juveniles. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about changing the juvenile justice system, juvenile justice system. And then also absolutely expand our mental health court to veterans. So it's not about the number of programs, it's about the quality of programs. Are you evaluating them? Are they actually changing outcomes? Are they actually changing lives? That's what we're talking about, not just the numbers, but actually making change. And that's what I've done at the Family Justice Center. We save lives there. We intervene at the opportune moment. We get people the help that they need. We get them out of that circumstance, and we change lives. That's what intervention programs and diversion programs are about. And I've done it. I've got a track record of doing it. I'm going to continue to do that, especially for our juveniles here in Montgomery County.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
The problem my opponents have is that they know that Montgomery County is unparalleled in the number of diversions we have. We do 5,000 people a year. We have diversion programs for drugs, drug treatment, alternative community service for nonviolent criminal offenders. I started the mental health court. I think, look, it's already doubled in size since I began it here in Montgomery County. Do we need more mental health treatment? Yes, we do. I stopped the prosecution in 2015 of simple possession of marijuana. Now, why did I do that? Well, first of all, I also will tell you one of the ways we can reduce violent crime in this community is legalizing marijuana. That's a longer conversation. I can have that with you. The other thing is that there's a great racial disparity in the enforcement of marijuana laws. So in some jurisdictions, it's up to 10-to-1 African-American men are arrested and charged with marijuana versus white offenders. You stop the criminal prosecution of marijuana, you're taking a huge bite out of the racial disparity in the enforcement of drug laws. And then we also have pre-diversionary programs. One of the things that we do here in Montgomery County is we educate people. And most of these programs are designed to help kids. We have a Choose Respect program that we run that we educate young people in their young dating lives how not to become physically violent towards each other, because too many of those relationships have violence. We have a program that talks about Speak Up, Save a Life, because we know that 100,000 people in this country lost their lives to opiates last year, 100 from our community. I've talked to 2,000 high school kids last week. I've talked to 80,000 high school kids about opiates. Internet safety. We are trying to, not taking kids out of the system, like the truancy prevention program. If I can get a kid re-engaged in their education, and 90% of the kids we serve in our truancy prevention program are Black or brown children in this community identifying needing services by Montgomery County schools. We are pre-diversionary in Montgomery County. That's where we are. We're not even at the diversionary level. We are at pre-diversion.
Hey, thank you. So I believe, Mr. Paylor, we're starting with you for this question. This is primarily a question about racial bias in data. So just giving you all for fair warning. It's a long question. So Mr. McCarthy, as the current state's attorney, has acknowledged that his office has insufficient data to determine whether there's racial bias in the office's prosecutions during the 2 years prior to the onset of COVID, and accordingly commissioned a $500,000 2-year study on that issue that one of my colleagues at Maryland is helping to head up. Now, one of the four of you will be the next state's attorney when this study results are revealed. Some of you all have already alluded to this. So the results will be revealed in 2023. If the study does reveal racial bias in past prosecutions, how will you remedy this going forward? Second, will you remedy it for the defendants whose prosecutions reveal racial bias? And then also, based on what I know about the way data operates in racial bias, will you hold specific attorneys in your office accountable if it shows that they have disproportionately contributed to this? And then finally, how will you go back and examine prior years, even beyond these previous 2 years? So Mr. Paylor, start with you here, and we'll work our way around.
You had several questions in there, but I'm gonna try to hit them both. First of all, you're presuming I'm gonna allow the study to continue. Okay, I don't need to waste. I know it's funded through RAND and some other issues, but first thing I'm gonna look at with that study is the termination section and make a real evaluation. Do I need to spend that money to tell me something that I and many people in Montgomery County know? I was very curious at the starting point. Why I was started 2 years ago. If I was the state's attorney for 16 years, I would start from day one of my administration, but that doesn't answer your question. I had the lived experience here in Montgomery County, right? And so I'm gonna hire folks with the lived experience, and this office is going to look like Montgomery County when I'm the state's attorney. Also, we have the conviction and sentencing integrity unit. And so I'm going to create that unit, expand that unit to make sure that there is a place where people can apply to have their sentence, their conviction, and their sentences reviewed for just those kind of things. And I talked about it later with the reviewing the data. In terms of seeing patterns as it relates to prosecutors, if there's an extended pattern of bias, racial or any other kind of bias, they're just not gonna work in their office. We'll terminate them. And further, as it relates to the police, we will create, maintain, and publish a do not call list. And when we see there's officers who have displayed a pattern of excessive force and racial bias and dishonesty in court, they will be placed on the do not call list, and that do not call list will be published. And so those are the things that I'm going to do as state's attorney to make sure that that kind of behavior is rooted out and eliminated from the criminal justice system here in Montgomery County.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Degonia.
I mean, the commission, the study's been commissioned. So we're going to take the data that we get. We're going to see if it's good data. We're going to see what the results tell us, and absolutely going to act on that. If it's not adequate, I'm here to tell you, systemic racism exists already. I don't need a study to tell me that. I see that in the jail, but I'm going to look at the data, because what does that do? That helps us improve and change. That's what we need to do. If there are particular prosecutors who are engaged in that type of activity, they're gone. You serve at the will of the state's attorney. This is a very powerful position. You can make those decisions, and I will make those decisions based on that information. But the other part of the question was, what do you do to look at sentences? There's currently a conviction integrity review unit in the state's attorney's office right now, in name only. You don't know how to get into that program. There haven't been any cases reviewed. I'm committed, and I will hire a former defense attorney, whether they are a public defender or a federal public defender, to come in and run that unit, a robust unit that will go back and look at sentence and conviction integrity, someone who has handled murder cases, who knows what they're doing and knows what they're looking for in these cases. Right now, we have a unit in name only, very little information about it. Any cases have been handled. I'm committed to righting those wrongs, because we have to acknowledge those wrongs exist, and we have to move forward and fix them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy. I don't think, and when the question was posed, I actually disagreed with some of the assumptions that were made in the question, because I don't think that I disagree with anything anybody said here. I think that there is racial disparity that exists in the criminal justice system. I don't think anybody can reasonably disagree with that, and I don't disagree with that. The study is being done so that we can do a deep dive into the way we function, and what role can my office play at the critical junctures where we have intersections with individuals that are charged with crimes, to help to reduce that and make sure, based on an examination of the facts that we as a community come to an agreement on should be considered, that a person gets treated fairly, not on the basis of ethnicity or racism or anything like that. I do have a conviction integrity unit. I've had that. It's like another one of those examples. We're talking about something as if it doesn't exist. We don't publicize it? Go to my website. The application for a conviction integrity is on the state's attorney's website. If you want to file one, you can file one, and the application's right up there. I think I am very proud of the fact that we're taking this deep dive into what we're doing here. And I also think that the reason that we're doing this now, and been working on this for 2 years already, is the community wants it. And I've been listening to the community. And the community wants a dashboard. They want to know these facts. They want increased transparency, and they're going to get it.
Right, thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
So as a proud graduate of the Howard University School of Law, I was trained with an eye to understand the system is not just for everyone. And as a former prosecutor, the reason why I was a former prosecutor is that I saw for myself as a line prosecutor, the system is not just for everyone. So no, you don't need data to say what's already in existence, what sociologists, historians have explained to us has been in existence. But the data is what the community has been asking for. So I will take the data that's already prepared by the time I become next state's attorney and see what can be done to eradicate or at least lessen the blow of racial bias that's unfortunately inherent and embedded in the system. Now, we talked about how we changed, dealing with the prosecutors and if they display any racial bias in their prosecution. Well, that's going to come with when I get into office, making sure that we're all on the same page as to what it means to be fair and equitable when prosecuting these cases. And if people are not on the same page with that, yes, they're going to be let go, because that is not a prosecutor's office that the community of Montgomery County is looking for the future of our county. So not only that, but we will constantly be training one another, reading the appropriate books, whether it's stamped or other scholarly books out there that talks about race in America, how it's applicable in Montgomery County. We're going to have those discussions on a monthly basis, not only when we're talking about how we try our cases, but how does it impact the diverse communities that we live in. So those are some of the ways that we want to make sure that racial bias is being addressed and being eradicated in our office and in Montgomery County.
Okay, thank you. So now we are going into our last round of questions. So starting with Mr. Degonia, then we will work our way down. And I think we should be able to get through these last four, and of course, concluding with you all's final statement. So in 2020, the legislature passed the Juvenile Restoration Act, which allows young people sentenced to life in prison and other extreme punishments to petition for resentencing. How will you approach such requests for resentencing?
Eagerly. I want to hear and I want to understand why this individual, a human being who is serving a sentence that they were given before their brain was fully formed, as we know, based on the science, why their case should be reconsidered at this point. Have they demonstrated the ability to reform themselves? What was the nature of the offense at the time? If we ignore these cries for help, we ignore the humanity and we deny the ability that a human being can change. And that means we've lost hope. That means we've lost hope in our youth. That means we've lost hope in the ability to do better. And when a child says, I did something bad when I was 15 or 16, and now I'm 30 or 40, we have to listen to that cry and we have to take it seriously. At the same time, we have to accommodate and acknowledge the pain that the victims suffered. So there has to be a balancing. But to deny the petition, to deny the review, is really to deny our humanity and to deny that children can grow into better people. So I would eagerly welcome those.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy. I actually support the bill in terms of the review after 20 years. Quite candidly, everybody should recognize if somebody's in jail for 20 years, you're probably talking about murder or rape almost every single time. So the children that are coming back after serving 20 years, these are not kids who've committed minor crimes. These are major offenses. The last one of these that came across my desk was a guy who killed his mother, his grandmother, and his grandfather when he was 17 years old. So these can be complex. I agree with Tom. I think that after 20 years for some of these really young offenders, they should have an opportunity to come in and argue their case. I will tell you, and I'm glad to hear that someone else said it, because I also think we need to balance. These are not, when somebody says you got a minute, you got 90 seconds. Let me tell you, a lot of these, and anybody up here would say, this is not a 90-second conversation. Any answer we give you is an abbreviated Cliff Note version of something we could talk to you about for hours. That's the reality. When you're doing a review of some of these cases, these are very complex things so you need a deep dive into it. I do support the review, but I'm also sensitive to the victims. Let me tell you, this is like, you go back, I've prosecuted myself, been involved in over 100 murder prosecutions where I meet with families of victims. Let me tell you, these are emotional things. People live with this for the rest of their lives. You go back on these cases, you're ripping scabs off of wounds for these victims. So we've got to find some kind of balance between making sure that child or person is treated fairly, but the victims are not abused by the system either.
Thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
So I will assign a prosecutor or two to review these sentences because most of these sentences, yes, are for serious crimes. And I will also work with the public defender's office to make sure that we have the appropriate number of cases to bring it before the court to have these cases reviewed. Oftentimes, even though you have the tool to deal with this remedy, these individuals that have been incarcerated for 20 years, it's a hard road to get there. As a criminal defense attorney, I definitely have had the requests for reviewing one's sentences after many years, or just looking for some help. And having the role of a prosecutor being so critical and so important is critical to have an active prosecutor working towards a more just system. And that's going to include partnership with the public defender's office to bring these cases to light, to bring them before the court. Because as I mentioned earlier in the night, our prosecutor has a lot of weight with the courthouse, with the judges. And if we can all be on the same page, that makes justice go a lot more efficiently. And what I would also add is that, yes, it's also critical to talk to the victims because these are serious crimes that we're dealing with, especially with, for instance, Johnny Mavo, who was clearly a pawn with the gentleman that has now been executed John Muhammad. But yes, he should be held accountable for his actions, but he was also young. And this tool that is now in place in Maryland is a critical tool for folks like him to be restored, but also we cannot neglect the fact that the victims need a chance to be heard too in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Paylor.
Thank you. First, I want to go back briefly to the current state of Montgomery County. They have a conviction integrity unit, but they specifically exclude sentencing review. And that's something that distinguishes my office and me from the other candidates. Also, I think we should go briefly into the history of the act. The history of the Juvenile Restoration Act came out of the office where I'm currently employed. Through our Conviction and Sentencing Integrity Act, we accepted the application of the attorney of Mr. Arthur Miles. He was a juvenile convicted to life in prison. After reviewing with the Department of Corrections, Parole and Probation, and conferring with the family, he was released. We joined with defense counsel to have him released. And guess what? He's employed. He works in our office. Okay, it's a success story. It was so successful, guess what happened? The state came to our office, learned the details, and sponsored this bill and adopted the practice statewide. Out of all the candidates on the stage today, I am the only one with the managerial experience and the executive experience to be involved with situations like the Juvenile Restoration Act. And that's what makes me the best candidate for Montgomery County State's Attorney. You heard a lot of people say, this is what I'm committed to doing. This is what I want to do. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I'm actually doing. I am actually in the business of criminal justice reform. And I want to bring that practice here to Montgomery County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paylor. So, Mr. McCarthy, this next question is for you. Feel free if you want to follow up on anything that you just heard, because we were talking about units that already exist, that need to be expanded, that potentially do some of that. So feel free to do that, but I'm going to ask this question and want you to pivot here. This question is about police. So we've been talking essentially about police as being kind of the side partners. Obviously, we know State's Attorney's Office works very closely with law enforcement. So this is a two-pronged question that state's attorneys have to balance. How will you work collaboratively with police while also holding them accountable? We heard from Mr. Paylor about the do not call list. Some of you all are probably familiar with that. That is a list that prosecutors might put together to choose not to call law enforcement to testify. We have to think about what that means for those individuals to be on that list and still be patrolling our streets. Obviously, when we think about that, and of course, that state's attorneys trying to do what they can do to address that particular issue. So this is a two-pronged question. How will you work collaboratively with them, but then also hold them accountable? Because we know that accountability can sometimes sour the relationship to work with them.
I'm going to deal with the second part of that question first. Let me say, one of the things that I did in 2015, President Obama issued a white paper on policing in the 21st century. One of those recommendations that came from President Obama, this was after Ferguson and after Freddie Gray, was that we should never have a police officer investigated by an agency of which they are a member. And they should not be prosecuted by police officers that may have interactions or friendships with them. I became the first prosecutor in the country to adopt that recommendation. Quite candidly, now that we have independent investigations that are being done by the Attorney General's office, that was inspired by what I began with Howard County back in 2015. We were years ahead of the curve. I believe that the first thing we need to do to get public confidence is to independently look at situations when the police improperly use force, and in the cases that we're looking at, these involve deaths. In terms of working with the police, I think, look, there is collaboration. I have someone who teaches at the academy to make sure that we teach constitutional law, search and seizure, so that the police play by the rules. We do have do not call lists. If I find an integrity violation by a police officer, I will tell them we call it the death penalty. I death penalty police officers. I will not sanction or call an officer who lies under oath, commits perjury or fraud. I will not do that. And in any instance where we find anything relating to a police lack of candor about anything, we disclose it in discovery because we play fair. We have open file discovery. If it was Tom's case or Bernice's case, they would get that information because that's the way we operate.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
So with respect to the first part of the question regarding working collaborating with the police, I have actually tried to do that in my capacity on the Leadership Academy for the Bar Association for Montgomery County. I was a Leadership Academy fellow. One of our projects was to develop a mental health program. This was all before COVID, so it never came to light, but I remember vividly having a conversation with one of the police officers about incorporating the police department in providing mental health services. And I forgive me, I can't remember his name, but I remember he said to me, well, that's never gonna fly. I said, why? I said, well, you know, the line police, they don't really wanna, you know, be seen dealing with that. So I'm paraphrasing. And my first reaction was, okay, well, I wanna find a way to talk to the chief of police. I mean, that's just the kind of thinking that I think is critical to be the next state's attorney for Montgomery County, is to not take no for an answer, making sure that we treat our police as true partners, but yet hold them accountable, which includes making sure their mental health is appropriately sound, because that's also a factor in how they react on the streets with individuals that may not look like them. And when they do have circumstances where they're in those circumstances in that they are mistreating someone on the streets, that they end up arresting or not arresting, and I find out about it, whether it's through my proposed channel of collecting misconduct claims or use of force, that's something I'm going to bring up with the police department, with the districts, and with the chief, because I'm going to get to the bottom of this in terms of restoring trust in our community, and that includes dealing with the police collaboratively. And one thing I'll quickly note about the accountability portion is that I will also, of course, disclose in discovery, and I do support Do Not Call List.
Great, thank you. Mr. Paylor.
Well, yes, I do believe, you know, police are our partners in law enforcement. Once elected, I'll be the chief law enforcement officer in Montgomery County, but we do have to work collaboratively with our police department. So now let me give you examples of what that means to me. In our current position right now, every month we meet with command staff. Every month we sit face-to-face with command staff. First Wednesday of every month. Third Wednesday of every month, we meet with the FOP face-to-face, and we have tough conversations. And I'm tell you the truth, some of the conversations, you know, jaws are tight. People, you know, it's not always comfortable, but we have to deal face-to-face with the issues. And we have to meet regularly, consistently, true collaboration. We meet on cases that they're working on. We meet on cases where we're prosecuting police officers. We meet on legislation. Sometimes we find ourselves aligned on certain positions. Sometimes we find ourselves, you know, on opposite ends, but we always dialogue. We always communicate. That is real collaboration. And that's what I want to bring here to Montgomery County. Now, Mr. McCarthy talked about his do not call list. He talked about lying and veracity, and I agree those are some of the things that should be considered, but also racial bias. When I see incidents and I learn of incidents of officers, you know, having racial bias, they will be placed on the do not call list. And one thing I'm gonna say quickly, you can Google me in the post, Henlea versus Prince George's County Police. There's an article, there were incidents of racial bias. The police weren't forthcoming, and I had to go to federal court. My boss sent me to federal court to go unseal the records so we could explore racial bias. We went to federal court, and we were successful to get those records. And that's the kind of vigor I'm going to bring to Montgomery County to make sure we have police accountability. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
You don't just walk into some place and start collaborating. I've been collaborating with the police both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney for the last 25 years here in Montgomery County. I know the officers, I know the command staff, and I can walk in and talk to them when I'm the state's attorney, and I'm going to say, listen, Commander, fill in the blank. These are my priorities. How do we accomplish these priorities, and how do we work together? Because this is a state's attorney who has been in the courtroom with you, maybe has been on the other side of a case with you, and they still respect me, and they have their trust that we can bring them along. You can't just come in and tell people what to do. You've got to bring people along, and you have to listen to them as well. You talk to Commander McBain, who's the commander here in Silver Spring. and you have conversations with people and you talk to them what's working, what's not working. And more importantly, you convey to them your prosecution priorities so that when those are going out into the field, they know what cases to charge and what cases not to charge. And you're in the community. Community-based prosecution puts a prosecutor in the police station, and that's critically important, not just for better policing, but for better transparency and accountability. We're talking about culture change. You have to be present. You have to be there to witness and engage in that culture change. And prosecutors are the only people who get to see all the body-worn camera. Defense attorneys don't get to see it. Everyone else doesn't get to see it. So you can see what's going on in the station, what the officers are talking about. And so when there are problems and you put them on the list, you put the priorities on there and you actually have a written policy about here's what gets you on the list, here's why you're going to be disqualified, that are consistent with our ethical and Brady obligations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we are going into our final question and then kind of final statement here. So bigger picture questions here. And this one is starting with Ms. Mireku-North. If elected, what would you want to have accomplished by the completion of your 4-year term ending in 2027? What would you hope to have changed in the state's attorney's office and in the legal and law enforcement communities?
Great question. In 4 years, I want to see us have a greater trust in our criminal justice system. That's going to come with changing the leadership in the face of that office. I mean, just plain and simple. This is not to take away from anyone that's working there for several years, but we're a different county. And the disconnect is what's breeding the increased violence and the increased distrust and the protests. And the outcries for these police-related shootings. So I want to create an environment where we're actually having an office that's reflective of our county, not just in mind, but in background and lived experiences, people that have had families that have gone through trauma, or they've faced trauma themselves, or have gone through drug addiction and things like that. Those are things that I think are very critical and makes someone a very holistic prosecutor that we need in our county. I also want to have a system where we're dealing directly with our youth's mental health, because that is critical. As I mentioned before, we have the best and the brightest in this county, and that most of them should not be populating the juvenile justice system, but happen to be Black and brown, because that's really the direction of our public school system at this point. And I want to have a system where we actually are being holistic and restorative with our youth, and not just letting them cast aside as part of the system, because that's just the way it is. That's the way the law is. Those are the two elements that I really want to see happen in the next 4 years, coupled with transparency, but those are two options, two outlooks I want to see and visualize for the future of our county.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Paylor.
Well, I want to expand and have more robust diversion programs. I want to reduce the jail population. I want to eliminate the practice of charging juveniles and prosecuting juveniles as adults. And I also want to expand the behavioral health services, particularly for those who were charged with a crime. Like I said, we're going to live at the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health. And we want to make sure that both for our victims and our accused, that they're getting the services that they deserve, and that we are properly evaluating each and every person charged. Like I said, the motto in our office is going to be see the whole person. And I want to build up a relationship, and I want to have a police force that we can be proud of and that are revered and respected in every corner of the county. And we want everyone to feel that they are respected and protected by our police department.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Degonia.
At the end of 4 years, we will have created a firearm safety task force that has made a marked reduction in firearms and firearm violence in our community through a coordinated effort with state, local, and federal law enforcement officials. We'll have a fully integrated community-based prosecution with prosecutors who are empowered to be in the community, to be problem solvers, whether it's a problem in Silver Spring and a different problem in Burtonsville, or maybe a very different problem in Damascus, someone who knows the community that we serve. That's what my office is going to look like. It's going to reflect the rich diversity that is Montgomery County, over 1.5 million people, or 1.1 million people. It's going to reflect that diversity and that richness, because we cannot prosecute, we cannot police a community that we don't know and that we're not engaged in. And at the end of those 4 years, you're going to have problem solvers, you're going to have engaged community members who are actually making a difference and asking for sentences that make us safer, not just tougher sentences, but smarter sentences, sentences that serve the communities we live in. That's the type of community and that's the type of service that you're going to have from me as state's attorney in 4 years.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I think it's really important for us to reestablish the safety in all of our schools again. And that safety relates to the ghost gun issue, but it also relates to the opiate crisis, and education is really a big, let's not lock them up, it's education, it's prevention. I think we need to expand mental health services in the county. Look, I think numerically, I think it's not just Montgomery County, where if you went to the jail, the largest mental health provider in the county is the jail. The largest mental health provider in almost any community are the jails. Probably ask any jailer in America, they tell you 1 out of 3 people that are in their facility probably belongs more in a hospital bed than in a jail. We need to expand those services. We need to reduce violence. I actually think this is a longer conversation, but I really do think the legalization of marijuana in Montgomery County, if you're killed selling drugs in this county, it's always pot. It's always pot. 14 homicides, last 14 homicides related to drug distribution in this community, it's always pot. I think we can reduce and actually reduce the demand for guns and reduce murders by intelligently dealing with the subject of marijuana. I also think we have to put in place the recommendations of the PPI group that is finishing their study for us right now. And we've got to build trust. We've got to work with it. We've got to talk to each other. We need to build friendships to make these safer communities.
Okay, thank you. All right, 60-second closing statement. We are starting with Mr. Paylor and we will end with Mr. Degonia.
60 seconds. Wow. First of all, I want to thank you all, you that are here in person, and also everybody that's online for taking time out of your life to come to listen to what we have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a son of Montgomery County. My father moved the family here in 1974. I was raised here in Montgomery County, graduated from Paint Branch. I had the lived experience here in Montgomery County to bring real criminal justice reform to Montgomery County. I've been appointed twice by the Montgomery County Council to the Juvenile Justice Commission, and I currently serve on the Montgomery County Charter Review Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring both the executive experience and the managerial experience to bring real criminal justice reform to Montgomery County. And you know what I'm really proud about is our campaign. Our campaign represents the real rich diversity we have here in Montgomery County. We've been endorsed by CASA in Action, Jews United for Justice, and Working Families. That is a very, very broad section of groups who have gotten behind my campaign from every corner of Montgomery County, from Silver Spring to Darnestown to Poolsville to Gaithersburg. Our message of safety and justice has resonated, and I look forward to this campaign. I'm gonna ask each and every one of you for your vote to allow me to be the next state's attorney for Montgomery County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Degonia.
Two things that I'm the most proud of in my legal career have been the creation of the Racial Justice Council as the president of the Bar Association and the formation of the Family Justice Center Foundation. And you can go online and you can read my resume, but I want to tell you about a case that changed my life. And her name's Maria, and I was a prosecutor at the time. And Maria was worried because her husband had beaten her up pretty badly this time and had broken her arm. And she previously had decided not to testify against him. But we were going to go forward on the case anyway. And she said, Tom, I can't do it. He'll kick me out. My sons and I won't have a place to live. We went forward on the case. And Maria took the stand and she said, no, it was an accident. The jury found him not guilty. The next morning I came in feeling pretty low about myself. And there she sat in the lobby with her 3 boys. And she said, I heard what you said yesterday. I want out. Will you help me? And I did. We created the Family Justice Center, and it changed lives. I lost that case, but I saved her life, and I changed the lives of her 3 sons. That's the ethos, and that's the leadership you need to have in the state's attorney that needs to inspire everyone in that office that we deal not with budgets, we deal with individuals, and it is a life and death decision that we have to make. That's why this is so critical, and that's why I'm asking for your vote on July 19th.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I want to thank the Women's Democratic Club for hosting tonight's event. I'm a little bit disappointed because you didn't give me an opportunity to talk about one of the things I'm very proud of, and that's the role that women play in my office. 60% of my attorney staff are women. I have 7 teams in my office, 5 are headed by women. The teams that are headed by women include major crimes, gangs, juvenile court, district court, and special victims unit. I will tell you, I'm very proud of each and every one of those women and what they do to make my office a spectacular place to work. I actually see myself as an educator more than a prosecutor. I've taught at Montgomery College forever, long time. 5,000 students have been my students at Montgomery College. I teach at Johns Hopkins for the last 20. I've taught internationally, and I've been in both the Ukraine and Russia. I'm not taking responsibility for what's happening there, but I've been there and I feel for the Ukrainian people. I think the experience I bring to this job is why I've been endorsed by 50 elected officials and 5 unions. Visit my website, look at the list of people that stand with me, and ask yourself why. Because I'm the right person for the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mireku-North.
Thank you for the Women's Democratic Club and all of you all for sticking around for 2 hours tonight. I'm a wife, mother, daughter of African immigrants that has devoted her life to the community and the courtroom. And you've heard a lot of that coming through in my answers tonight. I believe I have the right vision, the right experiences professionally, educationally, and learned experiences and leadership to take our State's Attorney's Office to a new level for the future of Montgomery County. And that's why I've been endorsed by a lot of up and coming new generational leadership in Montgomery County. Delegate Janelle Wilkins, Delegate Gabe Acevedo, both in Silver Spring and Germantown, Montgomery Village, respectively. I've also been endorsed by Julie Polokovich-Carr, who represents Rockville and Gaithersburg. I've also been endorsed by Leslie Lopez, who has spearheaded in the House banning ghost gun legislation, because she saw my leadership right away when we talked about trying to reduce crime and the urgency of now, because that's the kind of leadership that I'm going to be in that office. That's leadership that we need. So I invite you to go to my website, mireku-north.com, because I know I'm the right person at the right time for the future of Montgomery County.
All right, thank you. Thank you all the candidates. Thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you to the Women's Democratic Club. And I'll turn it back over.
And thank you, Dr. Ray. I learned so much. It's such a wonderful job. And thanks to all the candidates for participating. I know it was a long night. You held up great, and I wish you all luck. Also, I'd like to recognize our elected members and candidates that are here tonight. So I apologize if I miss anyone. But Kathleen Dumais is here, who is a judge and a candidate. Maxwell Yee, running for sheriff. Jim Gilchrist, who's a D17 delegate. Raju Mahajan, candidate for Central Committee. David Moon was here. He's a D20 delegate. Joseph Griffin, running for the Register of Wills. Daniel Karoma, candidate for County Council, District 5. Richard Bass, candidate for sheriff. Famata Berry, candidate for Council District 5. and Karen Bushell, clerk of the court. So thank you so much for stopping by and hearing this very important candidate forum. I'd like to also remind you that the primary is on July 19th. So please get those mail-in ballots if you won't be in town. And information on all voting options are available in the lobby, including registration. I also want to let you know that there are numerous opportunities this Saturday, May 14th, to let our elected leaders know that we expect abortion rights to be protected. I would be out there, but I'm at an all-day board meeting for another organization. So be out there for me. Thank you. It is the Bands Off Our Bodies National Day of Action. If you can't make it to DC, because a lot of people will be in DC, there will also be a march at Leisure World as well, Saturday morning. So go to mobilize.us for more information. And please save the date, July 21st, for the not to be missed Kiss and Makeup Party that we, WDC throws every election. We have this little thing we need to do after the primary, and that is to take back the governorship. So I expect all Democrats to be out there making sure that we get our folks out there to vote. Before our final goodbye, I will leave you all with two tasks. Make sure you are a WDC member and take the pledge to register 5 new voters in a swing district or state this election season so we can keep Congress. It's really important. So I'll see you out there on the trail, and thank you all for coming. I feel like, yeah.